There is a silence that exists only on the edge of the world, where the restless Atlantic meets the jagged, unyielding granite of the Maine coastline. It is a silence not of emptiness, but of 1,000 overlapping sounds. The rhythmic pulse of the tide, the distant cry of a herring gull, and the soft, persistent sigh of the wind through the white pines. Long before the glow of electricity redefined the American night, there were men and women whose entire lives were measured by the slow, steady drip of oil and the rhythmic rotation of a glass heart. To understand the soul of early America, one must step away from the bustling streets of New York or the dusty trails of the West, and instead find oneself standing on a lonely slip of land, watching the fog roll in like a heavy velvet curtain, erasing the horizon and leaving only the steady, comforting beam of a lighthouse to guide the weary home. The year is 1874, and the air carries the sharp, bracing scent of salt spray and damp earth. You are standing on the gallery of a lighthouse, a structure of brick and iron that has stood as a silent sentinel for decades. The sun is beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple, dusty gold, and a soft, muted rose that seems to dissolve into the graying sea. This is the blue hour, that magical transition where the world slows down and the sharp edges of reality begin to soften. In this era, the United States was a nation of movement. Railroads were stitching the plains together, and factories were humming in the north, but here on the coast, time moved according to the ancient laws of the moon and the sea. The lighthouse keeper's life was one of profound routine, a meditative cycle of labor that provided the backbone of American maritime safety. Imagine the interior of the keeper's cottage, a modest stone building nestled at the base of the tower. The walls are thick, designed to withstand the fierce northeasters that lash the coast in winter. Inside, the air is warm, smelling of dried herbs, wood smoke, and the faint metallic tang of brass polish. A small cast-iron stove flickers in the corner, casting dancing shadows across the hand-braided rugs and the sturdy oak furniture. There is a sense of immense peace here, a sanctuary built against the vastness of the ocean. As the light fades, the keeper begins the evening ritual. It is a slow, deliberate process, one that has been performed thousands of times. Every step is familiar. First, there is the ascent. The spiral staircase of the lighthouse is a marvel of 19th century engineering. Narrow, winding stone steps that echo with the soft thud of leather boots. With each step upward, the sound of the crashing waves below becomes more distant, replaced by the low hum of the wind vibrating against the tower's exterior. It is a climb that requires patience, a gradual rising above the terrestrial world and into the realm of the sky. At the top, the lantern room awaits. This is a circular chamber of glass and steel, offering a panoramic view of the darkening Atlantic. In the center sits the crown jewel of the American maritime system, the Fresnel lens. Created by the French physicist Augustin Jean Fresnel, this lens was often called the invention that saved 1,000 ships. To look at it is to look at a masterpiece of glasswork. It is a massive, beehive-shaped structure made of hundreds of hand-cut glass prisms arranged in intricate tiers. Each prism is designed to catch the flickering light of a central oil lamp and refract it, concentrating the scattered rays into a single powerful horizontal beam that can pierce the darkness for 20 miles. The keeper moves with a quiet grace, his hand steady. He begins by trimming the wicks of the lamp. The term wick trimmer was often used as a nickname for keepers, and it was a task of utmost precision. A charred wick would produce smoke, which would soot the precious glass prisms and dim the light. With a pair of brass shears, the keeper carefully snips away the burnt edges, ensuring a clean, even flame. Next comes the oil. In the mid-1800s, lighthouses often used whale oil, but by the 1870s, the United States Lighthouse Board had transitioned largely to lard oil and, eventually, kerosene. The oil is poured into the reservoir, a slow, viscous liquid that catches the remaining twilight like liquid amber. Now, it is time to light the lamp. The match is struck, a sharp, sudden rasp in the quiet room, and the flame is applied to the wicks. At first, it is just a small, flickering glow, but as the oil warms, the flame grows, steady and bright. The keeper adjusts the height, watching as the light enters the first tier of prisms. Suddenly, the room is transformed. The glass beehive catches the flame and multiplies it, bending the light, focusing it, until a brilliant golden shaft of light shoots out across the dark water. But the light cannot remain stationary. To distinguish one lighthouse from another, each had its own characteristic, a specific pattern of flashes. This was achieved by rotating the entire lens assembly. The lens, weighing thousands of pounds, sits on a bed of bronze rollers or, in more advanced designs, floats in a vat of mercury to reduce friction. To move this massive weight, a clockwork mechanism is used. The keeper winds the weights much like a grandfather clock, pulling a heavy lead weight up the center of the tower. As the weight slowly descends over the course of the night, it drives the gears that turn the lens. The sound is a rhythmic, metallic heartbeat, click, whir, click, whir, a mechanical lullaby that resonates through the very stones of the lighthouse. Outside, the world has turned to ink. The stars are beginning to emerge, millions of tiny, cold pinpricks of light in the vast American sky. Away from the glare of city lights, the Milky Way is a vivid, shimmering river of silver. The beam of the lighthouse sweeps across the water, a long, reaching finger of light that illuminates the white foam of the breakers and the dark, rolling swells of the deep. It is a constant, reassuring presence for a captain miles out at sea, navigating by the stars and the sound of the swells. That flash of light is more than just a navigational aid. It is a promise. It is the voice of the land calling out through the dark, saying, "I am here. You are safe. You're not alone." The keeper takes his seat in a small wooden chair in the watchroom just below the lantern. He has a logbook spread out before him, a record of the wind direction, the weather, and the passing of ships. The pen scratches softly against the paper. The American coast in the 1870s was a highway of sails. Schooners carrying lumber from Maine, brigantines filled with coal from Pennsylvania, and massive clipper ships returning from the Pacific with silks and spices. You can almost see them in your mind's eye. Ghostly white sails caught for a fleeting second in the lighthouse beam before vanishing back into the darkness. The night deepens. The temperature drops, and a light frost begins to bloom on the edges of the glass panes. Inside the tower, the air remains still and warm. The rhythmic click-whir of the clockwork becomes the only measure of time. It is a space of deep contemplation. In this era of American history, the lighthouse keeper was a symbol of reliability and isolation. Often families lived at these stations, while the father tended the light. The mother might maintain the garden or teach the children, their lives intertwined with the elements. There were even many famous female keepers, women who took over the duties after their husbands passed away, proving themselves to be some of the most dedicated guardians of the coast. Think of the sound of the ocean below. It is not a roar tonight, but a long, slow inhalation and exhalation. The water slides over the barnacle-covered rocks, swirling into tide pools where anemones and starfish wait for the morning. The kelp forests sway in the currents, a hidden world of green and gold beneath the black surface. The rhythmic pulse of the sea is the oldest clock on earth, a steady beat that has continued for eons. Indifferent to the rise and fall of empires, yet strangely comforting in its consistency. As the hours pass, the keeper might step out onto the gallery once more. The wind has shifted, bringing the scent of the pine forests from inland, a sweet, resinous aroma that mingles with the salt. The lighthouse stands as a bridge between the wild, untamed sea and the growing, bustling nation behind it. In the distance, perhaps a few miles down the coast, the faint, flickering lights of a small fishing village can be seen. The residents are asleep, their dreams guarded by the steady sweep of the golden beam. The American landscape at this time was a place of immense transition, but the lighthouse remained a constant. It was an anchor in a changing world. From the rugged cliffs of Oregon to the sandy shoals of the Outer Banks in North Carolina, these towers were the silent witnesses to history. They saw the arrival of steamships, the laying of telegraph cables, and the slow evolution of a young country into a global power. Yet, inside the lantern room, the work remained the same. It was the simple, noble task of keeping the light burning. The keeper's eyes grow heavy as the midnight hour passes. The routine is hypnotic. The smell of the oil, the warmth of the lamp, the rhythmic movement of the lens, and the distant melodic thrum of the Atlantic. Every 4 hours, the weights must be wound again. Every few hours, the wicks must be checked. It is a labor of love, a quiet devotion to the safety of strangers. The darkness is not something to be feared here. It is a canvas upon which the light performs its essential dance. Imagine the light now, not just as a physical beam, but as a thread of history. Each flash represents a story. A sailor returning to his family, a merchant securing his livelihood, a young immigrant catching their first glimpse of the American shore. The lighthouse is a monument to human ingenuity and the enduring desire to protect one another. It is a testament to the fact that even in the vastest, darkest nights, there is always a way forward. The fog begins to drift in again, a soft, ethereal mist that blurs the stars. It clings to the surface of the water, rising like steam. The keeper prepares the fog signal. In these years, it might be a massive bronze bell struck by a clockwork hammer, or perhaps one of the new steam-powered whistles that would soon become common. The sound of a fog bell is haunting and beautiful, a deep, resonant toll that carries for miles, a low-frequency vibration that you feel in your chest as much as you hear with your ears. Toll, toll, toll. It is the heartbeat of the mist. You are there, in that quiet, high place, wrapped in the history of a nation that was built by hand and lit by flame. The world outside is vast and cold, but here, within the circle of the light, there is warmth, purpose, and peace. The heavy weight of the day's worries begins to lift, dissolving into the salt air and the rhythmic sounds of the night. The lens continues its slow, majestic turn. The beam sweeps out, a golden road over the water, leading toward a horizon that is hidden, but always there. As the pre-dawn hours approach, the deepest part of the night settles over the coast. The stars seem to burn a little brighter just before the first hint of gray appears in the east. The keeper remains at his post, a silent guardian in a tower of stone. The history of this place is etched into every brick, every gear, and every drop of oil. It is a history of endurance, of the quiet strength required to stand against the storm and keep the light alive. And as the rhythmic pulse of the sea continues its timeless song, you find yourself drifting, moving with the tide, carried by the steady, comforting breath of the American coast. Before the first thread of dawn could even think of stitching the Atlantic horizon back to the sky, the silence of the American wilderness possessed a weight that felt almost physical, a velvet pressure against the senses that whispered of ancient things. Moving inland from the salt-sprayed granite of the coast, past the tidal rivers and the burgeoning mill towns of the Piedmont, the land rises in slow, undulating waves until it becomes the Appalachian Mountains, the oldest peaks on the planet, worn smooth by eons of rain and wind into the gentle rolling blue ridges we know today. To step into these woods in the early 19th century was to step into a cathedral of green and gold, where the floor was a thick, springy carpet of moss and fallen needles, and the ceiling was a canopy of oaks and chestnuts so dense that the sun only reached the ground in scattered, dancing coins of light. The transition from the sea to the forest is a transition of sound. Gone is the rhythmic crash of the surf, replaced by the intricate, multi-layered symphony of the woods. In the deep hollows, those sheltered valleys tucked between the ridges, the air is still and cool, even in the height of summer. If you were to sit perfectly still on a fallen log of American chestnut, you would begin to hear the individual voices of the forest. The high-pitched, insistent yank-yank of a nuthatch as it moves headfirst down a trunk, the soft, dry rustle of a chipmunk through the leaf litter, and the distant, hollow drumming of a pileated woodpecker, a sound like a carpenter at work deep within the timber. In this era, the American spirit was defined by the axe and the hearth. Imagine a small homestead carved out of a clearing in the Great Smoky Mountains. The cabin is a masterpiece of functional beauty built entirely from the surrounding forest. The logs are thick, hand-hewn tulip, poplar, or oak, their edges squared with a broad axe until they fit together with a satisfying, airtight precision. The smell of the cabin is the smell of the mountains themselves, a heady mix of damp earth, seasoned cedar, and the sweet, lingering scent of hickory smoke from the chimney. The construction of such a home was a slow, meditative process. Each log was notched at the corners, the dovetail or saddle notch, a craft passed down through generations. To run your hand along the wood is to feel the history of the tool, the slight ripples left by the adze, the smoothness of the grain where the sap once flowed. There is a profound sense of security in these walls. They were built to hold back the winter, to provide a sanctuary for a family, and to stand as a testament to the belief that a person could, with enough patience, build a life out of the raw materials of the earth. Inside the cabin, as evening begins to settle over the ridge, the light takes on a different quality. There are no Fresnel lenses here, only the soft amber glow of tallow candles or a Betty lamp filled with rendered fat. The center of the home is the hearth, a massive structure of fieldstone gathered from the nearby creek. The fire is the heart of the house, never truly allowed to go out. During the day, it is banked under a layer of ash, a glowing ember waiting to be breathed back into life. As night falls, the keeper of the hearth adds a few seasoned splits of black locust or maple. The wood catches slowly, the blue flames dancing along the edges before settling into a steady, rhythmic crackle. The sounds of a mountain evening are a lullaby for the weary. There is the low melodic thud of a butter churn being operated by a steady hand, thump, clack, a rhythm that mirrors the heartbeat. There is the soft scrape of a wooden spoon against an iron pot as a stew of dried beans and salt pork simmers over the coals. The steam rises in gentle curls, carrying the aroma of wood smoke and sustenance. In the corner, someone might be working a spinning wheel, the whirring of the spindle a continuous droning hum that seems to vibrate through the floorboards, a sound so consistent it eventually disappears into the background of the mind. Outside, the mountain is preparing for sleep. The Blue Ridge for which these mountains are named becomes most apparent at twilight. A fine, hazy mist, composed of hydrocarbons released by the vast forest, settles into the valleys, turning the distant peaks into layers of indigo, slate, and charcoal. It looks as though the mountains are being slowly submerged in a sea of shadow. The birds fall silent one by one. The last to speak is often the wood thrush, whose song is a series of liquid, flute-like notes that echo through the darkening timber, a sound that feels like the very essence of peace. Then comes the whippoorwill. Its call is a signature of the American night, a repetitive, haunting whistle that seems to emerge from the shadows themselves. Whip poor will, whip poor will. It is a sound that marks the transition from the world of the sun to the world of the moon. As the stars begin to peer through the gaps in the forest canopy, the temperature in the hollow drops. The air becomes crisp and clean, filtered by thousands of miles of wilderness. You can feel it in your lungs, a coolness that reaches deep, slowing the pulse and quieting the mind. Living in the mountains required an intimate knowledge of the seasons. In the autumn, the forest performs its most spectacular transformation. The maples turn a brilliant fiery scarlet, the birches become pillars of shimmering gold, and the oaks deepen into a rich, rusty bronze. It is a slow-motion explosion of color that happens leaf by leaf, tree by tree. The air smells of leaf mold, that sweet, earthy scent of decomposition that promises new life in the spring. To walk through the woods in October is to walk through a world made of light and copper. Every footstep is muffled by the thick, dry carpet of fallen foliage, a soft crunch hush that accompanies you through the trees. The night in the cabin is a time for storytelling and craft. By the light of the fire, hands are rarely idle. A grandfather might be carving a spoon from a piece of cherry wood, the shavings falling silently onto the hearth like giant snowflakes. A mother might be working on a quilt, her needle dipping in and out of the fabric in a steady, hypnotic motion. These quilts were more than just blankets. They were maps of family history made from scraps of worn-out clothing, each square holding a memory of a wedding, a birth, or a long-gone season. The weight of a handmade quilt is substantial, a comforting, heavy pressure that anchors you to the bed and keeps the chill of the mountain night at bay. As the fire burns down to a bed of glowing coals, the cabin settles. The wood of the walls, expanding and contracting with the temperature, gives an occasional sleepy groan, a house shiver that reminds the occupants of the living nature of their shelter. The wind outside picks up, sighing through the tops of the white pines, a sound like the distant roar of the ocean we left behind on the coast. But here the trees act as a buffer, breaking the wind into 1,000 smaller whispers. In the early 19th century, the Appalachians were a place where the barrier between the human world and the natural world was thin. People lived by the signs of the moon and the behavior of the animals. They knew that when the rhododendron leaves curled tightly into pencils, the temperature had dropped below freezing. They knew that a heavy crop of acorns meant a long, hard winter was approaching. This connection to the land created a sense of belonging, a feeling that one was not merely an observer of the wilderness, but a part of its ancient, slow-moving clockwork. Imagine the absolute darkness of a mountain night before the age of artificial light. It is a darkness so profound that you can almost feel it on your skin. But it is not a threatening dark. It is a protective cloak. When you look up through the branches of a towering hemlock, the stars appear closer, larger, and more brilliant than they do anywhere else. The Great Bear and the North Star are the same guides used by the lighthouse keepers on the coast, providing a sense of continuity across the vast American landscape. The silence of the midnight hour in the hollow is deep and restorative. The only sound is the occasional whoo-hoo-hoo of a great horned owl, the silent phantom of the woods, as it glides on velvet wings through the understory, or perhaps the distant lonely cry of a bobcat, a sound that serves only to emphasize the stillness that follows. The creek nearby continues its endless journey over the stones, a liquid bubbling murmur that acts as a natural white noise, smoothing over the jagged edges of the day's thoughts. The history of the American interior is a history of these quiet moments. The long winters spent by the fire, the slow ripening of the corn in the high clearings, the rhythmic swing of the scythe in the hayfields. It is a history measured in breaths and heartbeats, in the growth rings of the trees and the migration of the birds. It is a story of resilience, but also of a deep, abiding calm. As you lie there, in your mind's eye, tucked under the weight of those heavy quilts in the heart of the Blue Ridge, the world outside ceases to matter. The bustle of the coast, the movement of the ships, the expansion of the railroads, all of it fades away. There is only the warmth of the fading embers, the scent of the cedar walls, and the slow, steady rhythm of the mountain breathing. The darkness is a soft blanket. The wind is a gentle song, and the ancient peaks stand guard around you, timeless and unshakable. The night flows on like the creek, moving toward a morning that is still hours away. In this space, there is no hurry. There is only the process of being. The logs of the cabin, the stones of the hearth, and the earth beneath the floorboards all seem to hum with a low-frequency peace. You are carried by the current of this history, a passenger on a journey through the quietest parts of the American soul, moving deeper and deeper into the stillness of the great green wild. Imagine a liquid road, a mile wide, muscle-bound and muddy, carving its way through the very heart of a continent, a serpent of brown water that dictates the rhythm of an entire nation's pulse. To see the Mississippi River in the mid-1800s was to see the jugular vein of American commerce and identity, a moving highway that stretched from the frozen headwaters of Minnesota down to the humid cypress-choked deltas of Louisiana. As we descend from the quiet ridges of the Appalachians, leaving behind the stationary peace of the log cabin, we find ourselves standing on the levee at St. Louis or Memphis at the stroke of midnight. The air here is different. It is heavy with the scent of damp earth, river silt, and the faint, sweet aroma of ripening cotton and river willows. The silence of the forest is replaced by a different kind of quiet, the low, vibrating hum of a floating palace resting at the wharf, its twin chimneys reaching toward the stars like soot-stained fingers. The steamboat was the marvel of its age, a wedding cake of wood and iron that defied the current and redefined the American concept of distance. To look at one through the midnight mist is to see a ghost of industrial elegance. The hull sits low in the water, burdened with crates of Ohio stoneware, barrels of Pennsylvania flour, and sacks of Kentucky tobacco. Above the waterline, the structure rises in tiers of delicate white fretwork, galleries that look more like a Victorian parlor than a vessel of transport. These were the Grand Republics and the Natchez of the river, vessels that carried the dreams of a westward expanding people upon their decks. Step onto the gangplank and feel the gentle rhythmic shudder of the boat. Even at rest, a steamboat is alive. Deep in the hold, the great boilers are banked for the night, their fires reduced to a soft orange glow, but the steam still sighs through the pipes, a metallic breathing that resonates through the floorboards. The smell of the boat is an intoxicating mix of expensive cigar smoke, roasted coffee from the galley, and the sharp, oily tang of the engine room. It is a world of contrasts. Rough-hewn cedar and pine in the cargo decks, and polished mahogany, crystal chandeliers, and velvet upholstery in the grand saloon above. The most peaceful place on the river is the pilot house. It is perched at the very top of the boat, a glass-walled sanctuary that offers a 360-degree view of the water and the wilderness. Here, the pilot sits in a high, cushioned chair, his hands resting lightly on the spokes of a wooden wheel that is 10 feet in diameter. In the 1850s, the Mississippi pilot was a figure of immense prestige, a man who had memorized every snag, every sandbar, and every fallen cottonwood tree along 1,200 miles of shifting water. To pilot a boat at night was an act of high meditation, a continuous dialogue between the human mind and the dark, treacherous mystery of the river. The sound of the river at night is a liquid symphony. As the boat pulls away from the levee, the massive paddle wheels at the sides or the rear begin their slow, majestic rotation. Slap swish, slap swish. The wooden buckets of the wheel strike the water with a rhythmic precision that acts as a natural metronome. The engine exhales through the scape pipes high above, a soft, huffing chuff-chuff that echoes off the limestone bluffs. This is the heartbeat of the Mississippi, a sound that could be heard for miles across the flat bottomlands, signaling to the lonely settlers in their riverside shacks that the world was still moving, still connected. The river itself is never still. It boils and eddies, creating boils on the surface where the current strikes a hidden obstruction. In the moonlight, the water looks like molten lead, shimmering with a dull silver luster. The banks are a wall of deep shadow, the bottoms filled with massive sycamores and ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss. Occasionally, the boat passes a towhead, a small sandy island covered in young willows that shiver in the wake of the steamer. You might see the tiny flickering campfire of a woodhawk, a lonely soul who lived on the banks, cutting cordwood to sell to the passing boats. Their lives were dictated by the whistle of the steamer, a brief moment of human contact in a life of profound isolation. As the boat moves south, the geography of the American heartland unfolds in slow motion. The river is a master of deception. It winds and loops so tightly that a boat might travel 30 miles only to find itself a few hundred yards from where it started, separated by a thin neck of land. These are the oxbows, places where time seems to pool and stagnate. In the midnight hours, the fog often rolls in, a thick white blanket that rises from the warm water into the cool night air. The pilot must then rely on his ears and his feel for the current. He listens for the echo of the whistle against the bluffs. If the sound comes back sharp and quick, the bank is near. If it fades into nothingness, the water is wide. There's a specific terminology to this life, a language born of the river. When the water becomes shallow, the leadsman stands at the bow, casting a weighted line into the dark. He calls out the depth in a melodic, haunting chant that drifts back to the pilot house. Is a low 3, half twain, quarter less twain? And then the most comforting call of all, Mark Twain, meaning 2 fathoms or 12 feet, a safe depth for even the largest steamer. This rhythmic chanting, combined with the slap swish of the wheels and the chuff of the engines, creates a trance-like atmosphere that pulls the soul toward sleep. The passengers in the staterooms below are wrapped in the finest linens, their beds swaying slightly with the vibration of the engines. For them, the river is a dreamscape. They are insulated from the snags and the sawyers, those hidden trees anchored to the bottom that could pierce a hull in seconds. They only know the elegance of the journey. The history of America is written in the passenger lists of these boats. German immigrants heading to the farms of Missouri, gamblers in brocade vests looking for a game of faro, planters returning to the Delta, and young families seeking a new start in the West. The engine room is the mechanical soul of the vessel. Imagine the massive horizontal cylinders, the brass fittings polished until they shine like gold, and the rhythmic movement of the pitman arms. The long wooden beams that connect the engines to the paddle wheel. The engineers move through the heat and the steam with quiet efficiency, tallowing the joints and monitoring the pressure gauges. There is a profound sense of order here. In a nation that was often chaotic and rapidly changing, the internal logic of the steam engine provided a comforting certainty. As the wee hours of the morning approach, the boat enters a particularly lonely stretch of the river, perhaps near the confluence of the Ohio and the Mississippi. Here, the water is vast, and the horizon feels endless. The stars are reflected in the smooth patches of the current, creating the illusion that the boat is floating through the cosmos itself. The constellations, Orion, the Pleiades, the Big Dipper, are the same ones that guided the lighthouse keepers and the mountain settlers. But here, they seem to move more fluidly, dancing on the ripples of the brown water. The history of the Mississippi is also a history of the land it carved. The river was a sculptor, constantly erasing old boundaries and creating new ones. A farm that was in Mississippi one year might find itself in Arkansas the next, after a cutoff changed the river's course during a spring flood. This sense of impermanence, of the raw power of nature over human design, is a fundamental part of the American story. It taught a certain kind of humility and a deep respect for the elements. Think of the silence that settles over the boat when the engines are cut to a slow bells as they navigate a tricky bend. The only sound is the water rushing past the hull, a soft, persistent hiss, and the distant cry of a barred owl from the swamp, its "Who cooks for you?" call echoing through the cypress knees. The air is thick and fragrant, smelling of blooming jasmine and the wet, fertile mud that would eventually become the richest cotton land in the world. The southern night is different from the northern one. It is more tactile, more intimate. The humidity acts as a conductor for sound and scent. You can hear the cicadas in the trees miles away, a continuous, shimmering wall of sound that rises and falls with the temperature. You can smell the river sweat, the unique aroma of 1,000 miles of organic matter being carried toward the sea. It is the smell of growth, decay, and rebirth, the eternal cycle of the American wilderness. The pilot house remains the center of focus. The pilot's eyes never stray from the water. He watches for the slick that indicates a hidden rock or the riffle that marks a shallow bar. His task is one of supreme responsibility, yet he performs it with a casual, understated confidence. He is a part of the boat, his nerves extending into the tiller ropes, his ears attuned to the slightest change in the engine's rhythm. This union of man and machine set against the backdrop of the untamed river is a quintessential American image. As the boat glides past a sleeping plantation house, its white columns glowing like bone in the moonlight, you realize that the river is a bridge between worlds. It connects the industrial north with the agrarian south, the settled east with the wild west. It is the great blender of American culture, where music, language, and ideas were exchanged on the decks and in the social halls. It was here that the seeds of jazz were sown, in the rhythmic work songs of the deckhands and the melodies played on the steam calliopes. The night moves on, the paddle wheels continuing their tireless labor. The boat is a self-contained universe, a tiny island of light and civilization moving through an ocean of darkness. The heavy, rhythmic pulse of the journey begins to seep into your bones. The vibration of the deck, the smell of the steam, the sight of the silver water, it all merges into a single flowing sensation of peace. There is no destination, only the journey. The river will always be there, flowing toward the Gulf, carrying the silt and the stories of a continent with it. You find yourself drifting, much like the boat itself, caught in the gentle current of history. The Father of Waters is a kind guardian tonight, its surface smooth, its path clear. The shadows of the willows sweep past the windows, and the stars continue their slow rotation overhead. The world is vast, the river is long, and the night is deep. In this space, between the banks of the past and the future, there is only the rhythmic, comforting breath of the water, pulling you down into the quiet, dark heart of the American night. The humidity of the river valley begins to thin, replaced by a clarity of air so sharp it feels as though you could reach out and touch the very stars that guided the steamboats north. We are moving westward now, crossing the invisible line where the trees surrender to the grass, and the horizon opens up like a great yawning mouth. This is the Great Plains, the Great American Desert, as the early map makers called it, a landscape defined not by what is there, but by the overwhelming presence of what is not. There are no mountains to catch the eye, no forests to break the wind, only a sea of tall grass, buffalo grass, and blue stem, stretching for 1,000 miles in every direction, a landscape that hums with the low-frequency vibration of the earth itself. Listen to the sound of the prairie at midnight. It is a dry, whispering sound, a vast hiss, as the wind combs through the stalks of grass. It is the sound of 1,000,000,000 tiny instruments playing in unison. In the 1850s, this was the great transition zone of the American experience. To travel west was to commit oneself to the great ocean of grass. Imagine a wagon train, a prairie schooner fleet, outspanned for the night. The wagons are arranged in a wide, protective circle, a corral, their canvas tops glowing a pale, ghostly white under the enormous western moon. South, the heat of the day has radiated back into the sky, leaving the air cool and brittle. The smell of the plains is unmistakable. It is the scent of sun-baked earth, curing hay, and the sharp medicinal tang of wild sage. It is a clean, honest smell, unburdened by the damp decay of the forests or the oily soot of the river. In the center of the wagon circle, the communal fire has burned down to a mound of glowing buffalo chips, the dried fuel of the plains that burns with a steady, smokeless heat and a faint, earthy aroma. The life of the overland emigrant was a study in a slow, grinding persistence. They moved at the pace of an ox, 2 miles an hour, 15 miles a day. This slow tempo became the rhythm of their souls. As the camp settles, the only sounds are the rhythmic chewing of the livestock tethered nearby, the slow, grinding munch-crunch of the oxen and mules, and the occasional lonely jingle of a harness. It is a sound of profound peace, the sound of animals resting after a day of immense labor. The night watchman sits on the tongue of a wagon, his rifle resting across his knees. He isn't looking for trouble. He is watching the stars. On the plains, the sky is not a ceiling. It is a bowl that fits over the earth, touching the horizon at every point. The stars here don't just twinkle, they burn. You can see the great square of Pegasus, the long arc of the Milky Way, and the steady red eye of Mars. The silence is so deep that the watchman can hear the heartbeat in his own ears, a soft, rhythmic thrumming that matches the pulse of the sleeping camp. Occasionally, the silence is broken by the coyote. It is the signature voice of the American West, a high, yapping bark that dissolves into a long, mournful howl. It starts in the distance, a lonely cry that is answered by another and then another, until the night seems to ring with the sound. It is not a frightening sound, but a wild one, a reminder that this land belongs to the wind and the creatures that run with it. When the howls fade, the silence that rushes back in is even deeper, even more restorative. As the 1860s arrived, a new sound began to pierce the quiet of the plains, the distant, haunting whistle of the iron horse. The Transcontinental Railroad was the greatest engineering feat of the 19th century, a ribbon of steel that stitched the Atlantic to the Pacific. Imagine standing on a rise in the Nebraska Territory as a night train passes in the distance. The locomotive is a black beast of iron and brass, its headlight a single searching eye that cuts through the darkness. The sound is a rhythmic clack, 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 The song of the rails, a mechanical heartbeat that signals the end of the wagon era and the beginning of a modern America. The railroad brought a different kind of calm. It turned a 6-month ordeal into a 6-day journey. Inside the Pullman sleeping cars, the height of luxury was achieved. Imagine the interior of such a car. The walls are polished walnut, the lamps are silver-plated, and the berths are draped in heavy crimson plush. The passengers are tucked into their beds, the rhythmic swaying of the carriage acting as a giant cradle. The sound of the steam engine, a rhythmic, powerful huff, 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 is a comforting reminder of the strength of the nation, a force that was taming the vastness of the continent. But even with the railroad, the plains remained a place of immense solitude. Between the stations and the growing cow towns like Abilene or Dodge City, there were hundreds of miles of emptiness. The homesteaders who stayed, those who built soddies, houses made of the very earth they farmed, lived a life of quiet endurance. A sod house was a burrow in the grass. Its walls were 2 feet thick, cut from the tough prairie sod. Inside, it was as quiet as a tomb and as cool as a cellar. The smell was the smell of the damp earth itself, a grounding, ancient scent that provided a sense of absolute security. On a stormy night on the plains, the soddy was the ultimate sanctuary. The wind would howl across the roof, the rain lashing against the thick walls. But inside, the flame of a single kerosene lamp remained steady. The sound of the wind was a wild orchestral roar, but it couldn't penetrate the heavy earth. This was the pioneer peace, the satisfaction of having carved a home out of the wilderness, a tiny pocket of warmth and light in a vast, dark sea. The history of the West is often told through conflict and gold rushes, but its true history lies in these quiet nights. It is the history of the night herders on the long cattle drives from Texas to Kansas. These young men, often just boys, would circle the sleeping herd, singing low, mournful songs to keep the cattle calm. These cowboy lullabies were simple tunes, sung in a low, gravelly hum. The sound of a human voice, steady and familiar, prevented the skittish longhorns from stampeding. "Oh, bury me not on the lone prairie," the song would drift over the backs of 1,000 sleeping animals, a thread of melody holding the darkness at bay. The cattle themselves, thousands of them, would lie in the grass, their heavy breathing creating a low rhythmic sigh that could be heard for half a mile. The smell was of leather, dust, and the sweet breath of the kine. It was a masculine, rugged kind of peace, a brotherhood of man, animal, and earth, all resting under the same canopy of stars. As we move further west, we reach the high deserts of the Southwest, where the grass gives way to stone and sand. Here, the landscape is a cathedral of red rock and silent canyons. The air is so dry that it feels like silk against the skin. In the moonlight, the mesas and buttes of Monument Valley or the Grand Canyon look like the ruins of ancient cities. The shadows are long and sharp, a deep velvet black against the silver-washed stone. The silence here is different. It is an ancient geological silence. It is a silence that has existed since the beginning of time. If you were to sit at the base of a towering saguaro cactus, you would hear nothing but the sound of your own breath. The history of this land is written in the layers of the rock, the reds, the oranges, the deep purples, each representing 1,000,000 years of the Earth's story. It is a place that hums with the memory of the ancestral Puebloans, The people who built their dwellings into the very cliffs, finding peace in the high, hidden places of the world. The American West was a place where a person could lose themselves in the scale of the world. It was a place where the ego dissolved into the horizon. The vastness was not a void to be feared, but a space to be filled with the imagination. Whether it was the pioneer in his wagon, the passenger on the Pullman, or the cowboy on the trail, they all shared the same experience of the western night, a sense of being small, yet part of something infinitely large and enduring. As the midnight hour passes over the continental divide, the world feels balanced on the edge of a great height. The air is thin and cold, and the silence is absolute. The distant mountains, the Rockies, stand like jagged teeth against the sky, their peaks covered in eternal snow that glows with an ethereal blue light. This is the spine of the continent, the place where the waters part and the history of the nation flows in two directions. The rhythmic pulse of the West is the pulse of the seasons, the long, white silence of the winter, the sudden, violent green of the spring, the golden haze of the summer, and the crisp, clear brilliance of the autumn. It is a cycle that has continued for millennia, indifferent to the fences and the rails that humans have placed upon it. You are there, lying in the tall grass, or tucked into the velvet berth of a moving train, or sheltered within the thick earth walls of a soddy. The world is wide, the sky is deep, and the journey is far from over. But here, in the heart of the great American West, there is a profound, unshakable calm. The wind continues its long, slow conversation with the grass, and the stars continue their silent watch. The night is a vast, open room, and you are invited to rest within its walls. The heavy, rhythmic breathing of the earth carries you, moving you toward a sleep that is as deep and ancient as the stone of the canyons. There is no hurry, no noise, no light but the stars. Only the long, slow shadows of the clouds moving across the moon-washed plains, and the steady, comforting knowledge that the land is vast enough to hold all the stories, all the dreams, and all the peace of a nation. The scent of the Pacific is unlike any other. It is a sharp, invigorating collision of cold, deep trench water and the crushed, resinous needles of the coastal redwoods. As we cross the final granite spine of the Sierra Nevada, leaving behind the dust of the plains and the heat of the desert, the air undergoes a profound transformation. It becomes heavy with a moisture that isn't humid like the South, but crisp and bracing, a living air that seems to carry the pulse of the largest ocean on Earth. To arrive at the edge of the American continent in the late 1890s was to feel the weight of a journey completed, a sense of manifest destiny finally coming to rest against the immovable blue of the sunset sea. The transition from the high mountains to the coast takes us through a kingdom of giants. Imagine stepping into a grove of Sequoia sempervirens, the California redwood, at the hour when the sun is a dying ember behind the fog bank. These trees are the oldest living witnesses to the American story. Many were already towering giants when the first Norse longships touched the northern coast, and they stood in silent majesty as the 13 colonies became a nation. To walk among them is to walk through a cathedral whose pillars are made of bark and sap, and whose roof is lost in the swirling gray mists of the upper canopy. The silence here is absolute, yet it is a thick silence. The forest floor is a carpet of needles and duff, feet deep, which absorbs every footstep, every snap of a twig. It is a world of damp, cool shadows and prehistoric ferns that unfurl like green lace in the gloom. The smell is ancient, the scent of tannin, wet stone, and the slow, patient decomposition of wood that has taken centuries to fall. There is a profound sense of perspective here, in the presence of a tree that has lived for 2,000 years. The frantic pace of human history slows to a crawl. The redwoods breathe with the rhythm of centuries, not seconds. As the trail winds downward toward the coast, the sound of the forest begins to merge with the distant low-frequency roar of the Pacific. It isn't the rhythmic slap of the Atlantic, but a deep, resonant boom that vibrates through the very cliffs of Big Sur and Mendocino. This is the sound of the long swell, waves that have traveled thousands of miles across open water to finally shatter against the kelp-strewn rocks of California. The fog, known to the locals as a silver cloak, begins to roll in from the sea, moving through the canyons like a slow-motion tidal wave of white velvet. It blurs the edges of the world, turning the jagged cypresses into ghostly silhouettes and erasing the horizon until the sky and the water are one seamless shade of slate. By the turn of the century, the American West was no longer a wild frontier, but a land of burgeoning beauty and sophisticated peace. In the small coastal towns, the era of the flickering candle was given way to a miracle of modern science. In 1879, Thomas Edison had perfected the incandescent light bulb in his laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, and by the 1890s, that warm amber glow was beginning to illuminate the streets of San Francisco and Los Angeles. Think of the first electric lights. They weren't the harsh blue-white LEDs of today. They were soft, vacuum-sealed glass globes with carbon filaments that glowed with a rich orange-gold warmth, much like a sunset trapped in a jar. To see a street lit by these early bulbs for the first time was an experience of pure magic. The light didn't pierce the darkness. It nestled within it, creating soft pools of clarity on the cobblestone streets and the brass fittings of the cable cars. It was a light that invited contemplation, a gentle hum of electricity that promised a new era of safety and comfort for the American family. Inside a Victorian home on a hill overlooking the Golden Gate, before the Great Bridge was ever a blueprint, the night is a study in refined tranquility. The house is a marvel of redwood timber and stained glass, its gingerbread trim catching the moonlight. In the library, a fire of seasoned oak crackles in the hearth, providing a rhythmic, percussive counterpoint to the distant foghorn. The foghorn of the late 19th century was a deep, mournful diaphone note, a low B flat that groaned through the mist every 30 seconds. Boah! It was the voice of the coast, a reassuring sentinel that guided the clipper ships and the new steam schooners safely into the bay. The history of the American night is the history of this transition, from the lonely lighthouse beam to the communal glow of the city. Yet the heart of the piece remains the same. Whether it was the keeper in Maine, the homesteader in Nebraska, or the dreamer in San Francisco, the American night provided a space for the soul to reset. In this era, the American dream wasn't just about expansion or wealth. It was about the right to rest. It was the creation of a society where, after the labor of the day, a person could sit on their porch, listen to the crickets or the surf, and feel a sense of absolute belonging. As we reach the final hour of our journey across the continent, imagine the entire map of the United States laid out beneath the stars. From the rocky, stern and rock-bound coast of New England, across the emerald ridges of the Appalachians, over the silver ribbon of the Mississippi, across the whispering oceans of the Great Plains, and finally to these ancient, mist-shrouded forests of the Pacific. It is a land of immense variety, yet it is united by the same sky, the same constellations, and the same deep, restorative darkness. The 20th century is waiting just beyond the dawn, with its automobiles, its airplanes, and its frantic energy. But here, in this final moment of the 19th century, time is still held in a state of grace. The great redwoods continue to pull moisture from the fog. The click-whir of the lighthouse clockwork continues its steady count, and the embers in a million hearths across the country glow a soft, sleepy red. The American landscape is a giant, breathing entity, and tonight its breath is slow and even. Listen to the final sounds of the night, the soft hush of the Pacific wind through the Monterey cypresses, the distant rhythmic clank of a ship's chain in the harbor, the faint, melodic whistle of a locomotive miles away in the valley. These sounds are the threads of a tapestry, woven together into a blanket of history that covers the nation from sea to shining sea. It is a heavy blanket, warm and familiar, weighted with the stories of millions who have sought peace in this land. The fog has now completely enveloped the coast, turning the world into a soft white cocoon. The sharp edges of the cliffs, the vastness of the ocean, and the height of the trees have all dissolved into a singular, comforting gray. There is no more distance to travel, no more west to find. You have reached the end of the road, the final shore of the dream. The history of the nation is not just in its battles or its inventions, but in its quietness, the way the land settles into itself when the sun goes down. You are a part of this history now. You are the watcher on the gallery, the traveler in the wagon, the sleeper in the Pullman, and the dreamer in the redwood grove. The weight of the centuries is a gentle pressure, urging you to let go of the day. The rhythm of the tide, the pulse of the engine, and the sigh of the wind have all merged into a single hypnotic vibration that resonates in your very bones. The stars are still there, high above the fog, the same stars that watched over the first campfires on this continent. They are silent, steady, and eternal. And as the last diaphone note of the foghorn fades into the mist, and the final ember in the hearth turns to gray ash, the American night reaches its deepest point. It is a place of profound safety, a sanctuary built of time and memory. The land is at rest. The journey is complete, and the silence at last is total. The great, dark heart of the continent beats slow and steady and soft. From the Atlantic to the Pacific, the light has been trimmed, the fires have been banked, and the world is wrapped in a peace that surpasses all understanding. Sleep now, carried by the current of 1,000 years, drifting on the tide of a nation's quietest dreams.